I used to joke that most of the racial egalitarians' arguments could be applied to chimpanzees and gorillas. For example, the proclamation that brain size doesn't matter, that can be used to say that brain size differences between humans and chimps has nothing to do with their difference in perceived intelligence as subjectively perceived and as proxied for by various standardized tests. And while the innateness of the racial differences in perceived intelligence is obvious to anyone who isn't politicized in regards to this issue, the innateness of the human-chimp gap is 1,000-fold more obvious, so obvious that not even egalitarians try to deny it. However, if egalitarians applied their principles consistently, they would be arguing that the human-chimp gap is environmental. Bold claim? Not at all. Sure, there's a big brain size difference between humans and chimps, but you know what? Einstein's brain was small. Yeah, therefore, larger brains don't tend to be more intelligent, right? Kind of like, that one kid who had small muscles but was deceptively strong. He proves that larger muscles don't tend to be stronger. Yeah, right? The correlation between arm muscle size and strength is about 0.24. The correlation between brain size and IQ is about 0.4 within each gender, and I'll have links for both of those claims. So the systematically smaller chimp brain size, that proves nothing. And one can point to intensive interventions, right? These researchers trying to teach chimps and apes language and having mixed results. And flashes of humanity, but them not coming anywhere near a full human. But you know what? The failure of those interventions, or the relative failure of those interventions, that could just be a result of epigenetic effects, right? From the chimpanzee womb environment. Okay, the environmental disparity between humans and chimps goes back thousands of years. It's not going to be undone in a single generation. It's not going to be undone in a single intervention. These epigenetic effects from the oppression that was done to chimps, the hunting of chimps, and shutting chimps out of human society, I mean, that can't be undone in a single generation. And so those epigenetic effects are going to linger. Didn't think about that, did you? No, because you're in your specious fantasy land. Or how about this one? We haven't identified the genes that are responsible for intelligence, much less their distribution between humans and chimps. Okay, so we don't know. You don't even have a gene that can tell us this. So we don't know what the genes are that make humans and chimps differences. It make different, right? And what is intelligence anyway? Okay. If you can't operationalize intelligence, then you can't say that humans are more intelligent than chimps. Also, these tests, they're anthrocentrically biased, and I bet that you wouldn't last one day out in the wild where chimps live. If you had a test, how to scoop up ants with a little straw, I bet the chimps would kick your butt in that, wouldn't they, huh? So intelligence is relative. It's culturally relative. Yeah. But these arguments, they appear plausible when we're talking about racial differences. And I think this is because the racial differences are smaller. But you know what? On the other hand, I could say that the environmental disparity between humans and chimps is wider. We talk about stereotype threat. Well, the stereotype threat against blacks is nothing compared to the stereotypes against chimps. Education quality? Chimps don't even get an education. They're not even taught how to read. Diet? Most chimps don't even get enough calories to fully grow. Every chimp not in a zoo, like virtually all animals in the wild, suffers from what we call malnutrition, although malnutrition is a concept that came about once malnutrition was no longer the norm. Prior to that, it was just called life. Similar to child labor. I mean, the concept of child labor only came into existence once it was possible to abolish it. Prior to that, it was just life. But I digress. Now, blacks have an IQ of 85 on average, and have certain environmental differences from what we call whites. Chimpanzees, on the other hand, are so cognitively impaired relative to humans that IQ is not even appropriate. Now, if the slight environmental differences between blacks and whites in the U.S. are responsible for the black-white IQ gap, then why would it be so unbelievable that the crushing, overwhelming environmental differences between humans and chimps are responsible for the downright feral nature of chimps? I knew nobody who consistently applied their egalitarian principles in this regard until very recently. And there is one person I know who did this, and that person is Inmendham. That's right. His position is that the human-chimp intelligence gap is environmental. And why wouldn't you think that? Sure, the gap is larger than the racial gaps, but then again, there are much larger disparities in environment to go along with it and could account for it, if you assume that the racial gaps are entirely environmental. So I fucking applaud Inmendham. Now, there were some hereditarians who were saying that Inmendham is retarded for thinking this, and, well, I think he kind of is, but I disagree that he is less retarded than the other egalitarians. What Inmendham is doing is being consistent in the application of his principles. And Inmendham's position on the human-chimp differences is no more absurd than saying that the smaller differences in environment account for the smaller differences in racial intelligence as proxy for by IQ tests and generally subjectively perceived. So, Inmendham, I salute your consistency.